This is Dissecting Killer7, part of a series where I pick apart all the little details that make games special. Whether it be insightful monologues, groundbreaking design philosophies, we will cover it all. I wanted to talk about Killer7 because it's one of my favorite games, and having replayed it since the remaster came out on PC, I have a bunch new things to say about it and its relevance to today. I first discovered Killer7 reading Nintendo Power, and you just didn't see M-rated games in Nintendo Power featured this prominently. But yeah, they lay it out for you, and these are the 7 playable characters you get. They each have little profiles, so each have their weapon, their abilities, their quotes, so you already get a sense of who these characters are. And even though most of the dialogue between these characters are just one-liners, it actually does enough to characterize them. It'll challenge your very notions of what a game can do and even what it should do. It is, in essence, the very first video game art film, and it attempts things that no one else has ever dared. Does it succeed? Perhaps, in the end, that'll be for history to decide. I don't think I was really able to grasp what that meant at the time. Now that the game has been out for so long, I think we can begin to discuss the legacy of Killer7. Much of the discourse surrounding the game focuses on the unique controls and the absurd nature of the story. But this isn't just some weird for weird sake's game. As I've explored in my Asia Extreme video, this kind of surface-level reading tends to gloss over the nuance of the material itself. What I find so fascinating about Killer7 is that there are no other games like it. This perfect blend of personal expression, genre cinema, and even a little bit of conspiracy theory.
Well, may the Lord smile.
And the devil have mercy.
Killer7 takes place in the near future of 2011, where Japan and the US are vying for control of the entire world. The Japanese United Nations Party becomes the target for the Killer7, a group of assassins controlled by one Harmon Smith. Each member of the Smith syndicate has their own brief backstories, some more prominent than others, but the game is hardly a character study of these 7 personalities, as most of the characterization is simple and subtle. The first mission is effectively introducing the characters and laying out the formula for the rest of the game. These first few levels throw a lot at you, and you don't really have time to process it until you're on to the next thing. What little introduction we get to our playable characters is still shrouded in mystery. We have our first encounter with the Heaven Smile. This is the first one we see, disguised as a kid with some sort of accent?
It's dangerous. My friends are all dead.
We meet Vincel Dil Boris7 Irazaru for short, who is a helper figure in the game. We know this ludologically because he is the tutorial guy, but also because he holds this reverence to the master, referring to, of course, as Harmon Smith. I think this goes without saying that Irazaru is one of the more striking characters in this game, not for any meaningful narrative reason, but it's very much a part of that Suda51 milieu. We also meet with Harmon's maid, Samantha, who has this Madonna whore thing going on. At this point, it's unclear who is real and who is not, and there's many different ways the game tries to play with your perception of time, space, and mortality. The objectives of these missions are not to go out and explore these worlds. In fact, the world itself is very toned down, often monochromatic. And it's really guiding you to what's really important. Some things are in photorealistic detail. The reoccurring characters are really what shapes the world around the Smiths. Susie, the dismembered head, is a memorable character because she appears when you least expect her. She always has a key item in her mouth, but before you get it, you must listen to one of her many tragic stories. But these stories are meant to evoke a connection to the wider game world, which turns out to be very similar to the real world as well. Each of these side characters has an absurdist life story that intertwines with the Smiths. They are all people the Smiths have killed in the past, so they are interrogating for those reasons. But as a player, we're also picking up just how violent this world is. The end boss fights always take you through the Vinculum Gate, to Battleship Island, which is basically this huge pile of rubble that exists right in between the US and Japan. You seemingly move from time and space to get from these places. Garcian's trailer, the hub at the beginning of each level, also operates in a similar fashion, with doors connecting to impossible rooms. Conclude the level with our first scene of Harmon and Kunlan, godlike figures who encapsulate the conflicts between the US and Japan. Harmon representing the Smith Syndicate, and Kunlan, the leader of the Heaven Smile. Sunset is the longest mission, divided into 2 parts, and is mostly concerned with developing the wider issues in the game between the Liberal and the UN party. This is really all about the anxieties between the US and Japan, which is such a complicated history that strains the relationship between both countries to this day. And it's a central theme not only in this chapter, but the entire game. We, as the player, are interrogated about how our decisions affect the fate of Japan as we proceed to kill the leaders of the National Party. But we aren't presented with a moral choice until the very end of the game. We're on rails, literally and narratively. We also encounter many other characters who are radicalized against the Killer7. Jean de Paul, for example, who is influenced by Mask's wrestling career. Cloudman, to me, is one of the more interesting chapters because we get this unique Japanese perspective on the American South. Olmeda, the target of the mission, is this weird amalgamation of megachurch pastor, tech genius, and redneck. The mission opens with a terror attack on a big stadium concert, something that hit a little harder to me this time around after the recent Manchester bombings at the Ariana Grande concert. The Killer7 go to Texas, where Olmeda's base sits atop a mountain overlooking a typical American suburb. This image of the abandoned suburbs completely removed from the rest of society is an image that has become only more prominent over the years, if we think about Breaking Bad and Twin Peaks Season 3. There are cities in America that are completely controlled by corporations, and as we've seen with Google and Amazon, tech takeovers of urban areas are being proposed left and right. So playing this section of the game felt even more relevant to me than it did 15 years ago. The facade of the American dream is taken quite literally by the end. Olmeda and his empire is this big mishmash of American technological elites, this kind of retrofuturism we see when we think about how technological advancements are always used as the way to happiness, comfort, and efficiency. We see these figures as corporate entities above the law, or ones with the power to change it. But of course, in the conspiracy theory ladder of power, the tech giant lies somewhere underneath secret government agents because they jump in at the last minute to intercept him. In a general sense, Encounter is a lot about fleshing out Dan's story, and the US trying to respond to this virus that is turning people into heaven smiles. But it's all the subtle details that make this one of the darkest chapters in the game. The first part of the mission takes place in a carnival, which we learn is part of an underground child trafficking network, which our target, Curtis Blackburn is a part of. Organs harvested from the children are used to make new Heaven Smiles, and so the Killer 7 are brought in to disrupt the network. We fight with a lady from the immigration office, who turns out to be a Japanese lady abducted by Curtis at a young age and trained to be an anime super soldier. She's the only character in the game that actually speaks Japanese, and her head is not really an anime girl's face, it's just a cosplay mask. The next part of the mission takes place at Blackburn's compound, the area itself emphasizing just how much of a piece of shit this guy is. And it all comes to a head in a showdown between Dan and Curtis. Our next target is Travis Pearl Harbor, a comic book artist who draws the Handsome Men, a group of 6 men and 2 women put together by the US government to combat the Heaven Smile, which at this point have taken over the country. The strange thing is, anytime Pearl Harbor writes a comic, the events come true in real life, and Harmon is the next target in the next comic. Similarly to Cloudman, our target is killed before we can get to him, this time by Handsome Black. The mission ends in an 8v8 battle, which is predetermined at the end. You will lose, but Mask will evolve again, and Handsome Pink turns out to be Love Wilcox, a 16-year-old hacker going after the marketing firm that was responsible for Pearl Harbor's death. Smile is the climatic end to the story, where the Japanese forces begin amassing an attack against the US. Killer 7's target is Matsuoka, but most of this chapter is about learning the secrets of the Killer 7. A lot of the themes and ideas from the other missions rear their head as the story begins to come together in what I think is a really satisfying ending. Things happen rather quickly at this point. Christopher Mills is assassinated before he can give away any key information. Garcian then arrives at the Union Hotel, a place we learn where 6 people were killed. He returns to the overpass and meets with Linda Vermillion, a simply fabulous lady who is the protector of the country. We then arrive at Colburn Elementary School, a place used to rig all of the American elections, while simultaneously training secret Japanese agents to infiltrate the US government. We also learn about Emir Parkreiner, a student at the school trained to be an assassin. The Ministry of Education are the ones rigging the US elections, using polling stations at schools to make sure the right president is voted in. After one of the more bizarre boss fights, the Killer 7 are executed, and Garcian goes back to the Union Hotel. The player repeats the same process as before, going up floor by floor, but this time revealing the murders of the Killer 7, where it is revealed that Garcian is indeed Emir Parkreiner, and the case he was holding the entire time held the weapons of the 6 other Smiths. 3 years later, Emir Parkreiner travels to Battleship Island to confront Matsuoka, guardian of the door to the final Heaven Smile. He gives you the final decision: kill him to let the US take over the world, or let him live and allow him to proceed with the Japanese attack on the US. Killer 7 ends in a final confrontation between Harmon and Kung Lao years into the future. Despite the absurdity of the narrative, Killer 7 is extremely repetitive in terms of progression. The game consists of 5 stages and a prologue, each representing the next target for the Killer 7. We get a shot of the moon. Every mission starts this way and is one of Suda51's recurring symbols throughout his games. It exists to remind the player that the moon is always watching, as we, the player, are also an omniscient presence in this world. Surveillance is a common theme throughout the entire game. The in-game camera is not fixated on the player character, but is instead placed differently from scene to scene, sometimes giving the player a sense of distance from the action. Never at any point in the game are we getting the full perspective of what's going on. The Killer 7 aren't always able to reach their target in time, and the seemingly random characters emerge from the shadows to make these drastic changes that would be impossible to predict. And the Killer7 themselves, who are always working in the shadows, are not immune from being tricked themselves. They are always watched and surveyed and manipulated, as we learn by the end, by Garcian and Harmon. As we progress through the game, we are slowly uncovering these different facades, whether it be the power structures, celebrity, and even literally with the use of masks and costume. The political thriller is one of many twists and unknowns because of this long-standing notion that the government is not what it seems. We can tie the birth of the modern conspiracy thought to the assassination of JFK, where suddenly the notions that there were all these mysterious players who had a vested interest in changing the presidency of the United States. The idea that the president was fallible, that there was more powerful agencies at play that could get away with assassination in broad daylight. As we see in Killer7, the way that the presidents are being chosen by foreign powers in this very extreme and violent way. In Smile, Garcian plays Russian roulette with presidential hopeful Benjamin Keene. This scene really highlights the weakness of the figurehead. It's these layers of systematic abuses that are revealed to us more and more every day since the early 2000s. There is a long tradition of Japanese media depicting the complex, strained relationship of the US and Japan. The Treaty of Mutual Cooperation and Security between the United States and Japan, also known as the AMPO Agreement, first signed in 1951, details the military occupation of Japan for the sake of maintaining peace in the East. AMPO has a long history in Japan as being controversial, and was the cause of the Tokyo riots in 1960 when the treaty was first amended. It was also revised again in 2006, an event that was weighing heavily on the mind of Suda during the making of Killer7. Suda was tasked with making a game that appealed to both Western and Eastern audiences, so the game's narrative was meticulously crafted to speak to both. It's very easy to go into Killer7 trying to equate specific characters to places or events, or maybe movies he was inspired by, but I think you'd be hard-pressed to find specific connections. This game has been designed to mean different things to different people.
This country is big. It's too big. Our voices will never be heard.
Killer7 uses its simple, cel-shaded environment to draw attention to the details with ludite or narrative precision. During dialogue, words are repeated by different characters to emphasize themes and appeal to the player's worldview. For example, the word terrorism might evoke different memories and thoughts to an American over a Japanese person. While a Western audience would take the focus of 9/11 America, we must also remember the Tokyo subway gas attacks by members of Aum Shinrikyo only 6 years prior. The Heaven Smile look and behave like anything you would see out of a Resident Evil game, but they aren't zombies by any means. The Heaven Smile refers to the name of the terrorist organization headed by Kun Lan. The enemies you encounter are considered to be his violent followers that have either willingly or unwillingly been converted to the cause. The concept of free will when concerning terrorist groups and cults is complicated. There's this overlying narrative that people are always taken against their will and then brainwashed afterwards to do these unusual, ordinary activities. While there are certainly many terrorist groups that abduct people to join, there are also many other kind of cult-like groups that fill this void in people's lives, whether it be providing them with community or spirituality. But what we see is that when these groups grow, power structures form, and before you know it, the groups almost close in on themselves and become more extreme. As you progress through the game, the Heaven Smile become more distorted, less humanoid, and they're more difficult to kill. Visually, we see this as a zombie-like infestation. but symbolically, this is more reflective of how radical thought spreads. Cults will often appear to new members promising something to entice them to join, whether, it be enlightenment, community, love. Every Heaven Smile is a living bomb, reflective of the first Heaven Smile terrorist attack by suicide bomber. This means that you come in contact with them and they explode. They cackle and laugh, giving away their location despite being invisible. These attacks are very powerful, and you can only really get hit by one or two before you die.
Sarin nerve gas was released on the Tokyo subway during the morning rush hour, choking and blinding 5,500 people, killing 11. The attack, we now know, was part of a much larger plot aimed no less at overthrowing the Japanese state and starting a world war. These are the people being held responsible.
I want to talk a bit about Aum Shinrikyo, the cult responsible for the Tokyo sarin gas attacks, as well as its founder Shoko Asahara. Aum Shinrikyo's history is long and complicated. Starting in 1984 as a meditation group, Asahara would grow his group through exorbitant membership fees, appealing to the wealthy elite while simultaneously radicalizing the group into a doomsday cult. Asahara shaped the doctrine of Aum Shinrikyo in part from anime and manga such as Battleship Yamato and sci-fi fiction, predominantly the Foundation series. Aum would eventually produce their own material depicting Asahara as a godlike figure. But a common misconception of Aum is that they were all unintelligent but rich otaku. But in reality, they were some of Japan's most elite professionals and extremely dangerous. The fear, especially because splinter groups of Aum still exist today, is that these events could happen again. The predominant philosophy of Battleship Yamato, for example, is common throughout many anime and manga. This idea that this ragtag group of youths step up to save the world in the face of a government that won't allow them to. There are several anime cutscenes in Killer 7 directed by famous artists who worked on *Dean Angel, the Harry Potter movies, and yes, Battleship Yamato. The Tokyo subway attack was a devastating event in Japanese history that highlights this fear of the internal collapse of Japan, the corruption of the elite members of society that we see reflected in Killer 7. Killer 7 is a game that benefits from both an auteurist reading of the game and one that speaks to collective consciousnesses of both the Western and Eastern audiences. Killer 7 is undoubtedly a Suda51 game that cemented his signature style in the West. Everything from his love of cinema, Japanese wrestling, and even flowers are on display in this game, and the producers from Capcom gave him carte blanche to make the game he wanted. Killer 7 has taken on a cult following, much like the subject matter that's honored in this game. It's a dense game and benefits from multiple playthroughs, but it respects the hell out of your time with an average completion time of only 13 hours. Not a single screen in this game is wasted. It's abstract and daring with its narrative, but it's much more than just shock for shock's sake. Killer 7 is a game that appeals to the anxieties we have about our society and privacy, about democracy and capitalism, and of our own free will, no matter what part of the world they are from.